living in a university campus is sometimes not the best, as it can cost an absolute fortune for those who live far away from friends or family. So, there is another option though, but it does take longer to travel to the university that we went to. But it is a lot cheaper in that means. This option is to rent a nearby house or flat. With a small group of friends, you could easily spread the cost of living with those you partner with. Myself and a group of friends found a beautiful house that could easily fit us all, and I even got my own bathroom with a beautiful view from the bedroom window. Once we moved in, we decided to explore the home we rented and found that it had many hidden little spaces hidden by panels. These panels could easily be removed as they were only held on by a single screw. I entered the crawl space as I was the only one who could fit, and after a few claustrophobic episodes as I got stuck, I finally found myself in a place where I could stand up and move a little freely. When I was able to move better, I found a weirdly wrapped box that was placed under a lot of debris. I would have missed this box, but as I passed near it, I lost my footing and landed near it, causing my hand to slap against it. Once my hand landed on it, I removed the debris and uncovered this strange box. When my eyes landed on the strange box, I became transfixed on it, and as I looked around it, I found it as a square wooden box with simple dovetail joints and brass fittings. However, when I brought the box into the light of the kitchen, I found out that the box was locked and tightly sealed shut with oil-stained rope. This rope took forever to remove, as the oil has caused the rope to harden and become thick and rigid, so each movement of the rope caused loud cracking noises as each coil of the rope was removed from the box. Once the rope was removed fully, we found that the box was also wrapped in a cloth. This cloth we found was covered in weird little symbols that made no sense. My attempts to open the lock of the box was frustrating at best, as either the key was jammed or the key was incorrect. Hours of trying to pry the box apart seemed fruitless, as one of my housemates suggested we go grab some pizza and a few beers to celebrate the event of us moving in. So, with duress, I abandoned my attempt to gain access to this weird box. Hours later, we arrived home, and when I entered the kitchen to make a second attempt to pry up the box, I found that the box had vanished from the table where I left it. Looking around the kitchen, I asked my housemates about the box, and they just shrugged their shoulders and told me they didn't move it. So, I searched the house from top to bottom and come up empty. After laying down on my bed, my mind began to fill of images of the crawl space once more. Slowly, getting up and opening my drawer, I begin to search for my torch, and after a few moments of rooting around, I find it and make my way to the crawl space at the end of the hall, as if I was being seductively drawn to it by unseen words. Opening the hatch with my fingers as the screw wasn't done fully and removed it, I took the panel off and replaced it to the side and re-entered the crawl space and begin my spider web filled expedition deeper into the darkness of the walls of our home. Reaching the spot where I find the box, previously I searched around but found nothing, and within moments of my mind beginning to think something, a silent allure began to pull my attention onwards. and I slowly continued forward. But moving forward seemed crazy, as surely I would have met the end of the house. But the darkness just stretched on into the abyss, with no end in sight. After moving for what seemed like an age, the cobwebs became numerous and dense. But moving onwards, I find myself in an attic-type room that is only being lit by a single bulb hanging from a single beam that stretched along the roof of the room. Looking down where the light bulb is hung is a box, but this time the box is seen unlocked with the lid cracked open. Slowly moving forward, a pressure began to build around my mind as my thoughts began to swim and flutter, as my vision began to waver. Stumbling forward, I attempt to look into the box, but before I could reach the spot, I blacked out and abruptly woke up in my bed with a gasp of air. Looking around my room, I frantically dart my eyes around, panting, covered in sweat. But as I looked down at the foot of my bed, sitting there was the box, wide open. When I crawled to the foot of my bed and approached it, I looked down into its depths, and sitting there is an old-looking Ouija board with a smashed planchet. Picking it up, I run my hand over the wooden surface and find out that the letters and words were actually burned into the surface of the board, making it quite unique, as some of the boards I have seen were basic and normal, as the vinyl letters were never burned on. So, maybe I have discovered some sort of antique. Looking at the time, I found myself running late for class, so I quickly grabbed my items and run to catch the bus to my campus. Hours later, my housemate rang me with a frantic and angry tone, asking me what I was doing with such an object in the house, even though two of them was thrown out of their last dormitories for possession of drugs. I told them that I found it in the box that we discovered. My housemate, though, wasn't impressed, as such an item was in the house, as she began to worry that the object of the occult could lead to ill feelings. But I just liked it, and it could be used as a conversational piece when guests came around. However, once I got home, my housemate began to scream and shout at me, which was quite surprising, as her demeanour was never violent or confrontational. So I just told her that we would never use it, and I told her that the planchet was broken, so there's nothing to fear. However, a few days passed and my housemate began to act more and more erratic, to the point that if she even saw the Ouija board, she would outright begin to scream and cry, as she would sprout utter nonsense like, "It keeps looking at me," and "Why does it have my face?" My thoughts were that the stress of university life was finally getting to her, and she could do with a few days at home or away from campus completely to rest her exhausted mind. After a few more days, however, her mental state seemed to recover and become better, and her erratic behaviour seemed to stop. But when I was in my last class on a Friday, I received a call from an officer stating that I must go to the house straight away. Leaving campus, my mind raced why an officer is at our home, and if I find out that any of my housemates has weed again, I'll kill them, as I cannot afford to be kicked out of this house, as this was the only one in my budget. When arriving at the house, I was blinded by flashing lights and a few police cars and an ambulance, as that when I approached the tape, a officer confronted me and told me that there was a severe accident and asked who I was. Once answering multiple questions about my whereabouts and my movements for that day, I found out that my housemate, whom was acting erratic, had been in a fatal accident and has fell from the attic window. I found this a little strange as the attic hatch was painted over by the last resident and sealed shut, and we found it wouldn't even moved when we explored once we first moved in. It took 2 weeks to release the house back to us so we can move back in. Luckily, the university administrators understood and let us do remote learning. After the weeks of having to be at my parents' once again, I could go home and resume my life, but once returning to the house, I felt the atmosphere had totally changed. It is no longer warm and welcoming, but strange. My first night back at the house was terrible, as it felt like I was being watched constantly. Each hour I would awake, and the feeling of being watched and not alone never left the air. After that night, my mood dropped, and I felt terrible as each moment of the day I felt like I was being watched constantly, even when I knew I was completely alone. I spoke to my housemates and they felt the same, so I began to research the paranormal. And I began to sage the house, trying to release any bad emotions from the home. Going from each room, starting downstairs, I begin in the living room, then the kitchen, heading around back to the house and saging the lounge. I felt better, but once I began to ascend the stairs, the feeling came back, and I repeated the process in each room in order. But once I approached the back room where the hatch to the attic was, I felt so many eyes staring at me, each pair never leaving me once. I entered the room, and to my surprise, sat on the bed was the ornamental Ouija board I found in that box, just sitting there on the bed. As I began to sage each corner of the room, my head began to pound heavily, as each step felt like the world was spinning, and I could faint at any time. Once I was finished, I left the room and told my housemates that the sage could work, but more research was needed, as something didn't feel right at all. After that night I began to have terrible nightmares, where I was laid in bed and my housemate whom died was stood at the end of my bed constantly screaming at me, begging me to stop, as it won't allow her to leave. And once she finished speaking, the bed vanished from under me and I was falling from a great height. But once I was about to hit the floor, I awoke in a great panic as my heart was racing. That nightmare seemed so real, and when I looked to the bottom of my bed, I found the board once more, just sat there, seeming to taunt me. Weeks pass, and the nightmares are all the same. Each time my housemate constantly begging me to stop from saging, researching. Each new event is what she kept begging for me to do, as her eyes were screaming in agony. Each time I try to speak to people online, I either get roasted or people don't believe me. However, I received a private message from a person telling me that I am experiencing something called infestation, and it is the start of a demonic possession, and I should seek the aid of the church. After reading that, I speak to my housemates and they just scoff, not believing in anything like that, and just say that I am being silly and it's just bad drains for the smells or dead animals in the walls, as we do have many crawl spaces. So, my housemates are no help, so I decide to reach out to the church in my local area myself, and the priest told me without concrete evidence the church will not or cannot act on any issue. Finally, I had to reach out to the actual landlord of the property, and I found out that the money we send each month to the landlord actually goes to a PO box, not to his actual address. For this person, however, so I actually send him an email stating what is going on and what has happened. Hours pass and nothing, but once night falls, the feeling of being watched once returns. This time though, I was studying for my next exam, biology I think, and while I was examining a textbook, I caught a glimpse of something pass by, but that was extremely strange, as I was alone in the house at that moment. So I got up and investigated. But as I looked down the hallway, I saw a shadow disappearing into the back room, and I slowly began to approach. But I didn't wish to, but I had to check. The door slowly shut as I was in touching distance. That sent a shiver down my spine. I slowly stood at the door and slowly reached for the handle, but once my hand touched the handle of the door, the whole door began to rattle as if we were in an earthquake. That caused me to step back in fear. Slowly, watching the door rattle in fear, I looked to my side where the staircase is and stood there. In the light of the stairs is the image of my past housemate, slowly walking towards me. But each step it took, the image of her slowly sputtered and changed to a more decaying and rotted image of herself. Fear rose in my heart. The door stopped rattling violently, instantly, but as I saw the handle slowly turning, the image of my decaying house friend vanished. The door clicked and began to open, and stood there was an image of myself, like I was looking into a mirror, but it was stood and I was on the floor. It just stared down at me with soulless eyes, as slowly its features transformed into something of pure grotesqueness as it charged at me. But once its hands grabbed me, I awoke once more, my head laying on my books, as my body was covered in sweat and goosebumps. Looking around my room, I shiver and look at my laptop that is sat next to me and saw a blinking email notification, and when I opened it, I saw it was from the landlord of the house, and all it had in the textbook of the email was a phone number. Once I contacted the phone number, a frail sounding man picked up, and we spoke for a short while. This was the first time we actually spoke, as we rented through a management service, and the man told me that the house is cursed, as each time they rented the property, reports flooded in of weird and strange circumstances. One of the strange occurrences he revealed was that one day he did a housing inspection and found that the residents of the house was acting out of ways, and his mind instantly went to drugs or the growing of them. So he told the residents he was going to do a search of the residence and crawl spaces and attic space. Each place he checked was fine, but once he opened the hatch in the back room to the attic, he found something disturbing, as he found candles and weird drawings and pictograms in the center of the room. He didn't tell me what these symbols were, but my mind and my heart knew they weren't good. Once he revealed this, he tried to reason why he kept renting the property out, but after a long conversation, all I took out of it was that we needed to leave and not look back. However, As the conversation goes on, voices in the background keep whispering insults or aggressive groans and growls, and when I tried to address these, the man didn't understand and asked what I was talking about. And out of nowhere, the power in the whole house cut off. Looking around the darkened room, all I could see was shadows surrounding me, reaching for me, but as the lights flickered back on, the shadows vanished, and I was completely alone. Slowly raising from my chair, I looked behind me and noticed sitting there once more was the Ouija board. I look at it and walk over, feeling an intense rage welling up from within, and I grab the board and snap it in half and throw the pieces in the trash. While standing there outside of the house, I look up at my window, and all I could see was a mass of shadows pulsating and vibrating before a hand grabbed my shoulder as my housemate came home and saw me standing there and became concerned for me as outside was -5, and when I saw the time, I must have been standing outside for hours, even though, in my mind, I just left the house. I'd been that awful bored, but days later I went to see a priest and told him everything, and all they could advise is to leave the house, and he gave me a blessing. But once I returned, I found out that my housemates broken the paint seal on the attic once more, and that concerned me and caused so much anxiety, as each step in that dreaded house felt like nails into my soul. As when I approached the hatch of the attic, I could hear crying and whimpering, and also mixed within the crying was sadistic laughing. Slowly climbing up the ladder, I poked my head up and found that the dream I had with the box where I was stood in an attic was the same attic I was stood in now. As I look around, I found that my housemates were nowhere to be found, and that sent a chill of the grave down my spine. With caution, I fully climb into the attic and approach the center of the room, and I found, with great terror, the same Ouija board I smashed up days ago. Each moment that my eyes were locked onto that cursed board, I felt a pressure around my neck as if I was being choked by unseen hands. My eyes dart around the room, and all I could see was numerous shadows slowly circling me and surrounding me, as in my mind all I could hear was whispering chants, telling me to give myself into them and allow myself to be consumed by darkness. My breaths become sporadic, but my mind was able to break free of its hold, and I collapsed to the floor panting, as I see a growing black mass emanating from the center of the attic. Crawling slowly, I made it to the hatch and fell from the attic down the ladder onto the ground below, and as I turn over, I look up to the hatch opening, and all I could see was many sad and angry, emotionless faces staring down at me as the darkness begins to spread across the roof of the room. With great effort, I made it to the stairs as my vision began to waver as my body was injured. I make it to the top of the stairs, but fall down once more and tumble down. Coughing heavily, I look up to the stairs, and as I lay on the ground, I noticed that the shadow was just stood there, reaching its hand, causing the shadows to quickly spread onto the stairs as hands crawl towards me, as the feeling of dread fills my heart once more. I quickly get to my feet in agony as the fall broke my arm, causing pulsing spikes of agony to ripple through my body. Looking back as I tear open the front door, all I could see was faces, numerous faces in the darkness, each of them showing intense fear, sadness, agony, and many other emotions. Leaving the house, I took a few steps forward and collapsed into the snow. Slowly, my vision faded and I passed out, feeling the embrace of unconsciousness cover me like a blanket of freshly fallen snow. Days later, I awoke in the hospital and am surrounded by police and doctors. As they once realized I had awoken, I was questioned relentlessly about the fire. I asked them repeatedly about what fire. I don't understand. There was no fire. And that is when the policeman looked at me with extreme sadness and had to explain to me they found me laying in the snow of the front garden of the house. But the house was ablaze, and when the fire department got the fire under control and out, they found 3 bodies in the attic. And those bodies were such badly damaged, they had to use dental records to ID them. My heart dropped to my feet, and I began to weep for my housemates who had died in a tragic fire that had happened and I didn't even know about it. A few days later, a nurse came to me and told me that a package had been sent to me, and once the package arrived in my room, my heart began to sink into the pits of hell itself. As sat there was a box of familiar shape. And once I opened it, my worst fears were confirmed. As sat there on my hospital bed was the Ouija board, fully intact, even though I remember smashing it to pieces. And once I turned it over, I found a small envelope, and in that envelope was a note from my own stationery saying,
"Get well soon."
Hiya guys, this is Kindarous. Hope you enjoyed that story. This was actually a topic from my other half. She said, here's a topic, create a story around it. So it took me a little while and here it is. I hope you enjoy it, and I just want to thank everyone for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment in the section below what you liked about the video. And if you do like the voice changing parts that I do in it. So, like I said, hope you enjoyed, guys. This is Kindarous, signing off. See you later, guys.